Welcome to the Triple D Podcast, Donuts, Disability, and Discourse, where host Michael Leiner talks to the best in the business about community, impact, business, and donuts. Here's your host, Michael Leiner.
Well, thank you so much, and welcome to another episode of the Triple D Podcast, Donuts, Disability, and Discourse. We are here at Royal Donut on State Road in Parma, Ohio, and I have an extra special guest today, someone who I'm very excited about, somebody who I spend more time with than just about anybody else, Mr. Andrew November.
Hello.
Thank you for being here today, Andrew, taking time out of your busy schedule to discourse and dine on donuts with me.
You had me with Discourse.
Did I?
Yeah, the donuts are a bonus.
Let me ask you a question. So for people who don't know, Andrew and I started working together in 2016 or 2017.
Officially 2017, but I think it began in late 2016.
But you were my friend first, before we started working together.
Your bagel buddy.
We were bagel buddies.
Yes, we were.
We would meet at Corky and Lenny's. Or at, where else would we go? Would we find like random breakfast nooks?
That did not start until we started talking about partnership. We were pretty consistent. I can even remember your order, and I remember my order from Corky's because we went there probably once a week.
What would I get?
Scooped out bagel with a side of chopped lox.
With a side of chopped lox.
Do you remember
every
mine?
Single time. And iced coffee.
Iced coffee, which was just hot coffee poured over ice.
You mixed it up. I mean, I remember you having oatmeal at times. Sometimes you would eat like a poached egg.
Oh, yes. Yes, they do make great poached eggs.
Really?
Always with an everything bagel, which is from Bialys.
Yes.
Great Bialys bagels.
Yeah. What was it like thinking about going to, work and with a friend back then? I mean, imagine what was going through your mind. Were you nervous about what that would do to and what's nice is, even though, how many years ago is that? 6 years, but really like 7 years since we started talking about it. We've been able to continue being friends. So what was going through your mind at that time?
It was exciting, I think, because I always felt like I was practicing in an island. I mean, and graduated in 2009. This was not my first choice of law. And it's funny to say that 13 years later, and, this will be the type of law I practice for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But the biggest struggle I had graduating in 2009 was this is not what I wanted to do. I felt very removed from the attorneys I thought I would be part of and just really practicing on an island. So when I found you through those breakfasts at Corky's, it made me feel like I was not on an island. There was someone my age who was trying to navigate this area of law, which was ready for a big disruption.
Yeah.
We were kind of told this is how you practice this law, and we did things different. And knowing that I could do that with you at a new firm was very exciting.
Yeah. That
you accepted that discourse that we brought to this area.
Yeah. And, I'm just thinking about how much things have changed since then. I mean, I think that when you joined Leiner Legal, it was me. I mean, I was the only attorney, and we had maybe three support staff.
And one was out on leave.
Yeah.
Because she just had a baby.
And what about your first office, which was just sitting at the conference room table in my office?
I remember trying to sign a couple early clients and just being so unfamiliar and still doing things on paper. We hadn't gone digital yet. I remember I was just reminiscing about one of the first clients I signed in the office. And
you mean the sign-up paper?
Yeah, literally a packet of paper. Yeah, and trying to fill it in with pen and be like, how do we do things here? I have business, and the system wasn't ready for a second lawyer.
Do you remember the first day that we were working together, what we did? Because I remember.
I remember what we bought. We went to Aldi, and that's when you turned me on to whipped peanut butter. I have a good memory for very random things, so.
I remember, didn't we go to 2100 together?
That was before Aldi, but yeah, we started at 2100,
which is for those who don't know, that's a homeless shelter.
Yeah, an emergency men's shelter. I think the only one, actually, and it's a tough place to go, but we did the right thing. That was a client who would not have had access to a lawyer, but for you, willing to go, and I was always up for an adventure. I had been involved with them, but only on the outside. To actually go in there and see how our clients live and deliver services was a meaningful first day. Wasn't scratching my head thinking, did I make the right choice?
Right. Now, when you think about, I mean, there's just been so much change, and some of it wasn't deliberate. Some of it was like forced on us by COVID. But, and I say COVID in a negative way, but I think that certainly, despite the negative health elements of COVID, there were a lot of real positives that it brought to our office. But we went from like going out to a homeless shelter to sign people up to everything being on paper, and now everything's electronic. We rarely see our clients in person. Like, what's that been like for you?
For the clients, it's a win. The biggest issue we had, and again, being on the island, undercovered stories here, is we dealt with people that didn't have valid IDs. That was a constant issue, and they couldn't get into the courthouse. Or it wasn't even a matter of maybe we'd pay for gas to get them down to the courthouse. They wouldn't even have a car. So we had constant transportation issues, ID issues, logistical issues, childcare issues to get these clients there. And you would ask the judge for a phone hearing, and they'd look at you like you had four heads. Counsel, how are we going to do this on the phone? And then COVID happens, and then literally next week, I mean, honestly, compliments to the administration. They transitioned the phone hearings remarkably well.
Do you remember, and this is just kind of like, what COVID did for us, but do you remember I had a hearing that was scheduled in Hawaii in like, maybe it was April or May of 2020. The client, who I think was originally living in Parma, where we are right now, but he moved to India because he couldn't afford the health care that he needed here in the United States, so he literally moved to India. But the Hawaii hearing office was going to require me to come in person there, and I was like, I don't want to go. Can't I just appear on the phone? It didn't make sense to fly to Hawaii for one case when I knew I could handle it just as efficiently on the phone. They're like, no, we'll pay for your travel, but you need to come here. And then COVID happens, and now all of a sudden all of our hearings are on the phone. Just crazy to think about how there's been so much change like that over time. Are there other things that you think about that happened over the last like 3 or 4 years, which you and I are going to use for the next however long, that are going to be beneficial?
Definitely. I think sometimes you need that big disruption to say we can do these things electronically. We can do it on the phone. Even something as simple as I hate this phrase, but wet signatures.
Right.
For those who are unfamiliar,
why do you hate that phrase?
It's weird. I don't know. Wet signature, maybe. I don't know. I can't think of a better word, but for now we'll call it that.
Should we pull out our cherry donuts now?
Well, is it a good time? Yeah, exactly. Wet signature. I want a donut. But, for people who are unfamiliar, for many years, or really probably since the start of time, a lot of agencies required signatures in person, in ink, which really didn't make sense because a signature is just there to mark the intent of the signer. And now they've recognized that, with technology, you can have someone do it virtually. Yeah. I mean, I'm a notary. I can't remember the last time I've notarized a document.
I remember that was one of the things that I was most excited about when you came, was you had that notary stamp.
It's top of the line of my resume.
And I would be like, hey, Andrew, can you bring in that stamp? I remember one time I even went to your house to go get something notarized because we didn't have any type of notaries in the office.
And that's an example of how COVID has had a positive impact, because a notary is just, something from many, many eons ago when you needed to show a signature was original. But now, with an Adobe sign, which I use for my ERISA clients, you can see the email it was sent to. There's no question on validity. There's no question on intent. And luckily, Social Security, for our representative paperwork, has agreed to accept that. Yeah. And I think that's continuing.
Now, I think, and there's been many great contributions, but I think that the biggest contribution that you've brought to our office, in addition to, your warm personality, is, you've really pioneered a long-term disability practice for us, which we didn't have before. What's that been like for you?
I love it. I absolutely love it. There's so many different ways I can approach it. I mean, one, it's been great for me because, as I often like to say, I look at it as graduate level Social Security.
Why do you say that? What does that mean?
Because it allows me to draw on the most important aspect of disability benefits litigation, and that's understanding people, their medical conditions, their need for treatment, tying that all together to show that someone has restrictions that prevents them from work. Yeah. So I mastered that over 8 years of doing Social Security. So I've really only had to learn the additional component of litigation, dealing with case law and the impact that has on these specific claims, and dealing with insurance companies. And I've not hid my anger and disgust at insurance companies. Sure. Insurance companies, it's gambling. You're paying a very small amount of money, your bet, also known as a premium, for a reward or a payout. And the insurance companies do everything they can to deny our client's claim, or even if they prove the claim to implicate some type of limitation or exclusion or reduction. I mean, they don't make money paying cases.
So when you say that it's like graduate level, what do you mean by that? I mean, you've already described some complications to it, but for those who don't know that much about Social Security disability, I mean, arguably we still have to review medical records, prove, limitations from the facts. The insurance company, so to speak, is almost the government, even though it's supposed to be non-adversarial. But I know just from like tracking your journey through that world, it is different. It is, but explain why it's graduate level.
Sure.
What makes it more complicated?
So if someone calls me and asks me a Social Security question, I can answer it with my eyes closed, because the same rules, regulations, and interpretations of those two apply to every single case. If you call me with an LTD case, it's going to depend on what the policy says. It's going to depend on where the policy was issued. It's going to depend on where the policy can be enforced and against who. So there's so much extra. So not only am I just trying to show that my client's disabled, I'm also navigating in a complex area. And with Social Security, there's nobody defending your claim. Of course, you and I can joke that the ALJ, the judge, is maybe defending the claim, but they're technically not. But here, there actually is a defense counsel whose job is to zealously fight for the insurance company. And then there's a judge who's bound by that policy and bound by the case law and statutes that govern the resolution of the claim. So that's why it's the graduate level. So just winning the case is not enough. It's showing that there's a legal error.
Now, and I know that there's a lot of discussion. It's kind of a hot button topic for you recently about, there's some attorneys who believe that if you're a Social Security disability attorney, there's not crossover into the LTD world, and that there are distinct skill sets, and that it's almost a negative thing. I'm sure you know the conversation I'm talking about. When an SSD lawyer, tries to start an LTD practice. What are your thoughts on that? Have you experienced that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny we're talking about this, because I was just talking about it with my wife over the weekend, and I even showed her the email that I'm going to talk about here in a second. But yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. So, a lawyer who has a very successful ERISA LTD practice publicly stated that Social Security lawyers should not be dabbling in the area of LTD. And as a broad point, of course, I agree. Lawyers should not dabble in area of laws they're unfamiliar with.
Right. I
think we can all agree on that. That's not what my group does, and we kind of cut to the chase here. Is I started a group through NOSCR, which is a national organization of Social Security claimant representatives, and the group is meant to provide a place for LTD attorneys who also practice Social Security. In fact, I think a Social Security attorney will make a better LTD representative because they have what we just talked about. They understand the nuts and bolts of showing disability. So you just really need to take that extra step and learn litigation. So I don't agree with that position at all.
Were there specific challenges that you've had to overcome, or challenges that you're still dealing with and working towards, that relate to that transition from, it was the first 7-8 years of your career just handling SSD claims? I mean, I know you handled like a couple of VA cases at one point, but really you're a Social Security disability lawyer, to bringing on this new practice and like starting on this new venture. What are like the challenges that there were for you?
The biggest problem with our law school education is it did not teach us in any way how to practice law. I've always looked at our law school education as more of like a philosophy education. It taught us how to think about the law, how to think about structure and arguments together, which is invaluable, and I loved it, and I still love thinking about it and reading about it. But it didn't teach me, how do you file a complaint? How do you get a waiver of the service of summons? The basic elementary steps. How do you send an initial demand to opposing counsel? How do you calculate value of a case? How do you deal with a client and explain to them the merits of taking their case to court or maybe compromising with a settlement?
And for you especially, I mean, even just like kind of being a pioneer and starting that practice in our office, if we were in some big firm, there would be 50 other lawyers at least that you could go to and ask those questions, but you kind of had to figure that all out on your own.
Yeah, it was a lot of, Google's my friend. We've got great legal software, and also the most important thing is we have a network of other attorneys. Going back to my LTD group, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to start the group, so I could have a place to ask those questions. And those lawyers, on the way here, as I was walking in on the phone, I was talking to another LTD attorney who was just asking a question that really couldn't be answered anywhere else. The law school would not have given him the answer, and probably legal research wouldn't, but talking to other people who practice in this area would.
So we had Dave Nager on the podcast, who was, that's the first place that I worked after law school, and I always tell people that was law school for me, because I wasn't even really paying attention to much of what was going on in law school, but it was learning how to talk to people, learning how to, generate business and do the things that have, kind of gotten us here. That it's just such a great point where I think law, if you could, and we've actually had this circumstance coming up before, because we've had people who worked for us that were in law school or starting law school. If you were to redo that experience, say you were to start fresh, what would you tell somebody that wanted to go to law school or was actively in law school about how they should be approaching that, legal education, that stage?
I think you have to supplement the education with work. So both of us worked during law school. Yeah. So when I started at Case Western, when I was allowed to work, because I remember there was some prohibitions of working your first year, but starting with my second year, I got a job at a small law firm. And working at a small law firm means, as a law clerk, you can get pretty close to practicing law. Just your name is not signed at the end of those documents. And that's where I learned, the actual mechanics of starting a lawsuit or being involved in the different aspects of a lawsuit. But it still wasn't enough. And even if it was, I went into this agency type practice for, how many years was it before I filed my first lawsuit on my own? So there were times where I felt like a first-year attorney, but with 10 years of attorney experience, because I'm not saying the legal education failed me, or maybe I am saying that, but it certainly does not need to be 3 years of philosophy.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 years.
And I've seen this a lot more over the years. Unfortunately, I'm not as active in the law school where you and I went to, Case Western, but I think you've spoken there over the years as well, but Cleveland State has like that incubator where they really encourage people to learn the traits of like small office culture and what it's like to start a law firm. But even law schools now are starting to have a lot, like they're placing more emphasis on externships. I don't remember that at all when we were in school.
No, it wasn't. I think a lot of things have changed. I think there's a lot of good young energy that people are shaking up how we even look at the case law. I think we were taught to look at the United States Supreme Court as like the ultimate jurist, and this is what they say, and you accept it and apply. And I think there's been a really great shakeup where people are starting to question, like, well, why did they say that? Why did they reach that conclusion? Do I have to follow that? Maybe I should read this concurrence or dissent and advocate for it. And we weren't taught that, and that, I think, was a real failure in our education. And when we got out and you said, well, what's a precipice? Like, I filed a lawsuit recently, and I had a little error on my summons, and I needed a new one. Not a single part of my education prepared me for that.
Well, and I remember when you asked about a precipice, I think I said, I think you need to go get a mixer and some measuring cups.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like,
what are you
different?
Making? What is it a precipice for?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, here's another tip. I would say become very friendly with clerks of courts. I've learned more from the clerk of courts in the federal court system, county court system, than I ever learned in law school. So that would be tip number 2, is just ask if you don't know.
Yeah. A curiosity is probably the best tool that you can have. And like, I find myself telling like the people that work with us in our office, the support staff, ask questions. You will never, because that curiosity, the wanting to know something else, that's where everything comes from. If we weren't able to walk down the hall and ask each other questions, or how would you ever know what to do? But so many people are guarded about that.
Yeah, I won't say any names, but some of the most bizarre, decisions I've seen lawyers make are usually from sole proprietors or solo practitioners. There's an LTD attorney in Ohio that practices on his own, and just some of the motions he files. And I'm like, man, you just need a sounding board. Like you need like me in there.
Is this a defense attorney? Or
No,
is this
he's a plaintiff attorney like
attorney?
us, but he files kind of some wild motions and really seeks conclusions that I would never want to get near. And it's like, if he just had someone else to bounce these ideas, blue sky these ideas, like you wouldn't do that. I've been talked off my position from other lawyers.
And it's like you almost want to strike a balance. Like I think, we were talking earlier about how you and I used to get those breakfasts together, and that was so valuable for me because when I was working, when I was working in Dave Nager's office, I was in the Social Security department, but for the most part, it was really just me there, and I didn't have people to figure things out. But there was a positive to that, which is I had to find my own voice.
Mm-hmm.
I had to figure out how to make things line up, and I think that being a little radical with the way that I handle things was an advantage to me in winning cases that maybe I wouldn't have won other ways. Because if I had, a boss who was saying, no, you don't do that, you do this, I might not have had I would have used another word if we weren't recording, but the brawn to approach things the way that I did. But then, having mentors and peers that you can, go back on is so important.
Yeah, I've built a network that kind of allows for all that. So I've got lawyers that might take a more conservative approach, and lawyers that are just, what was the word? Brawn. So much brawn that and then I can kind of find that middle ground that works for me. Yeah. Because you have to find your own identity. There's no right or wrong way.
So let me ask you this, and I'm putting you on the spot because we're recording here.
This is about the cherry donut now?
No.
Okay.
We'll get to the cherry donut. Don't worry. We'll pop that. I already talked about how, you came in, you really started this LTD practice. I've encouraged you to make it your baby, especially now that, we're starting to like really see some results from it. Where is it heading? What are your goals for it?
What are my goals for it? Well, I mean, it's grown so quickly, when you were talking about, trying to find your own identity and to kind of radicalize yourself. And I did have that experience because I had to write a lot of briefs to the insurance company, and I had never seen what other lawyers had done. And then when I finally saw what they were doing and they were doing the same, I'm like, oh, wow, I just figured that out on my own. So, it allowed me to scale up with confidence, seeing that my gut reaction to how these insurance companies were approaching their insured clients was right. My disgust. It was, well couched, and that's how other lawyers had approached these insurance companies, and just realizing what they were doing was awful. So, I guess where I want to go is I want to continue to expand that. I've really made a name for myself in the federal court system here. We have many active cases in the Northern District of Ohio where we sit right now, and also in districts throughout the country as we're starting to take clients throughout. So because I'm starting to feel more comfortable in this area, I hope to just file as many cases as I can. And I want to ask those questions in these cases. I know that this is what the law says, but I want to, have that opportunity to ask and say, well, why does it say it? There's so many conclusions in this area of law that I don't agree with, but little substance, little meat on the bone. And, I feel like we have the tools and the courage now to ask those questions, to get the judges thinking and have them say, does it have to be this conclusion? Why?
And I think that it goes back to almost that curiosity that we were talking about earlier, just even having that approach in how you handle cases. It's just such a key ingredient for your recipe.
For my recipe, yeah. The way I'm building my recipe, it's interesting when you look at, the case law in this area. Often, you're looking at different circuits who, sit throughout the country and interpret these issues, and they can bind the lower courts. But there's oftentimes little analysis in these decisions, and then you find the trial court might have a little more analysis. Well, I want to use that argument to really get people to question their conclusions and not just say, this is the way it's always been done. Well, maybe here's a different approach.
I love that. And I really believe that I want you and I to be known as the best at what we do. And I'm excited because I think that it's not so much the recognition from others, but the recognition is just validation that we're doing things different than other people. And it's because of exactly what you just said. Breaking from traditions, breaking from norms, finding new ways to do things, better ways to do things. I really think that that's what's going to take you and I and our practice just propel us forward. If we can keep having that hunger and curiosity, we're always going to be doing things different, which is really better. And that's, I think, what will help us stand out. So I'm excited.
What I'm most proud about our firm, what I will, one phrase that you taught me, and we can use this in many contexts, is we're disability attorneys, we're not disability salespeople.
Yeah.
And there's so many different ways to apply that phrase, but to this question, I always said, I've never wanted to sell myself to clients. I put myself out there. You can learn a lot about me. You can see my work. And I'm not there to sell myself. But what I'm always happy to sell is that this is all we do.
Yeah.
That we've, for our entire legal careers, have lived and breathed disability law. And that fits in with my nature. So while this wasn't a job that I started, I didn't want this job. This wasn't my dream when I went to law school. It found me, though, and I've always had that sensitivity to people. I can remember being a young child and looking at people and seeing differences, and it struck me as a young child. So being able to advocate for those people now is very meaningful to me. So, that's what I want to continue with our identity is these are the group of lawyers who focus on helping people with disabilities. Unlike other firms that, they just found this to be a profitable part of their practice.
Yep.
We handle car accidents, divorces, and we got Joe over there who does, Social Security, just their random lawyer that they added because they saw some profit to it.
Yeah.
That's not us. We're here to help people with disabilities.
Yes, I love that. Well, it's come to that
Donut
time,
time?
which is my favorite part.
All right.
Because especially I'm a little bit hungry. I didn't get a chance to eat any breakfast. Once again, we're here at Royal Donut in Parma, Ohio. Now, I let our special guest, Andrew, pick our donut today. Andrew, what type of donut are we sampling?
This is the cherry donut. The
cherry donut.
I believe there's a glaze on it.
There we go. Would you like to have the first one? This is the first time that you and I have shot a donut video together since, do you remember the last one we did?
I don't.
Cafe du Monde in New Orleans.
Oh my goodness.
That was
before
2018?
COVID. Yeah, 2019.
Maybe 2019.
Wow. I remember that.
Let's see how this rivals that. So we got the cherry donut here. It's got cherry coating.
Yeah. It's a very pretty donut. It looks like there's real cherry in it.
It's a donut made with love, as you can tell from the coloring.
Not a lot of cherry donuts out there anymore.
Cheers with me?
Cheers.
There we go.
Oh, a really good donut.
I'm trying to get the cherry flavor. Are you finding the cherry in there?
Not a lot. It's a great donut.
It's a great donut. We had a friend of both of us on the podcast recently, Alan Tittle. Alan was saying that really what we should be doing is having every episode be a glazed donut. Since it's the standard, that's what you judge a donut by. It's a great glazed donut.
If you told me to eat this with my eyes closed, and this is a great donut, I want to say that before I say it, I would not know it's a cherry donut, but it's still a fantastic donut.
It's a fantastic
It's fresh.
donut.
The glaze is great.
I just saw you do a little motion with your lips that I hope to see you again. We're like,
I'm trying to find that cherry. I want it. I want
to find that cherry on the palate. Well, thank you so much for being here, Andrew. I love sharing this podcast with you, just like I love sharing my office with you and getting to spend time with you. So
thank you.
Thank you for everything.
This is a great opportunity. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Triple D Podcast, Donuts, Disability, and Discourse. Rate, subscribe, and tune in next week for more Discourse and Donuts.